They scoffed when he said it. At the corner booth of the city's most exclusive rooftop lounge, beneath the golden glow chandeliers and rhythmic echo of jazz, Damien Sinclair, the enigmatic billionaire tech magnate, looked at his closest circle of friends and, without flinching, announced, "I'm bringing Elara to the Winter Masquerade." Their reactions were instant. Raised eyebrows, a pause in champagne toasts, then laughter, sharp and echoing. "Elara," chuckled Theo, the hedge fund prince. "You mean your assistant? The one who shows up in flats and types faster than she talks." "I thought you'd be bringing someone, headline material," chimed in Giselle, flipping her diamond-drenched wrist. "Not your office's wallflower." Damien merely smiled, the kind that concealed far more than it revealed. He didn't defend Elara. He didn't need to. Instead, he sipped his whiskey, let their laughter echo into silence, and said only, "Just wait." No one understood why a man of Damien's stature, ruthless in business, flawless in appearance, and forever accompanied by women with magazine covers for faces, would invite his quiet, awkward assistant to the most prestigious ball of the season. But then, no one saw what Damien saw when Elara entered a room. They didn't notice how she listened before speaking, how her insight sliced through meetings like a surgeon's scalpel, or how her loyalty had remained unshaken through crises that made even the board tremble. She never bragged, never flirted, and never asked for more than what she earned. Her elegance was invisible, until it wasn't. The night of the Winter Masquerade arrived in a flurry of frost and starlight. The grand ballroom of the St. Marielle estate shimmered under crystal chandeliers, 1,000 masked elites moving like moonlight over marble. Everyone who was anyone was there, celebrities, moguls, royals draped in mystery and silk. Damien arrived alone. "Maybe she bailed," smirked Theo, already swirling a glass of bourbon, standing by the staircase with the others. "Or maybe she realized she was out of place," Giselle added with a glint of malice. But Damien, in his custom midnight velvet tuxedo and obsidian mask, didn't flinch. He stood facing the entrance, unmoved, his jaw firm and eyes scanning with quiet anticipation. Then a hush fell over the crowd. The orchestra slowed, as if caught in a sudden trance. Heads turned, whispers darted through the room like wildfire. And there she was, descending the staircase not like a guest, but like a legend carved into myth. Elara, unrecognizable to most, yet unforgettable to all. Her gown was a masterpiece, a sculpted silhouette of deep sapphire and onyx, catching the light like stars dancing on midnight waters. Her hair, usually tied back in a no-nonsense twist, now flowed in soft waves, adorned with tiny crystal pins that shimmered like frost-kissed petals. Her mask, a delicate lace of silver filigree, revealed eyes that no longer hid behind screens and schedules, but glowed with quiet command. She walked with a grace that silenced judgment, every step echoing with intention. She wasn't just beautiful. She was breathtaking, ethereal. And in that moment, everyone who had laughed forgot how to breathe. Theo choked on his drink. Giselle's smirk died mid-gesture. Conversations faded into awe. Elara reached the bottom of the stairs and met Damien's gaze. He extended his hand without a word, and she took it without hesitation. They stepped onto the dance floor as the orchestra swelled into a waltz, and the room, for a moment, belonged only to them. They moved like they had danced together for lifetimes. No stumbles, no nerves, just connection, raw, magnetic, unspoken. Damien leaned in during a spin, his voice low. "You were magnificent the moment I met you. They're only now catching up." Elara smiled, a glint of fire behind her eyes. "Let them watch. I'm not here for them." Their chemistry was no longer subtle. It was undeniable. It shimmered through every turn and glided through every step. The murmurs around the room shifted from gossip to admiration, envy, even reverence. Who was she? How did they not see her before? But Damien saw. He always had. Later that evening, as the moon crowned the sky and guests began unraveling their masks, Theo approached Damien sheepishly, a laugh caught in his throat. "I'll admit," he muttered, "I was wrong. She's not what I expected." Damien turned, gaze steady. "That's because you only ever looked at the surface." From across the room, Elara caught Damien's eye again. She was surrounded now, not with whispers or mocking eyes, but with admiration. Powerful women asking her who she was, influential men offering wine and conversation. But she didn't linger. She crossed the ballroom with the same quiet strength and stood beside Damien again, as though the night had waited for it. They didn't need a title. They didn't need validation. The truth was already written in every glance, every touch, every word unspoken. And as the night melted into memory and stars watched over the city, the man who once shocked the elite by inviting his assistant to a dance now stood beside the woman who had just rewritten every rule of their world. They left the ballroom just as the final notes of the waltz faded, slipping into the moonlit terrace where the chill of winter kissed their skin and the city lights flickered below like stars drawn closer. The laughter and music behind them felt distant now, like echoes from a life they no longer belonged to. Here, in the stillness between the glow of chandeliers and the hush of falling snow, Damien looked at Elara like he was seeing the night for the first time. "Are you overwhelmed?" he asked softly, removing his mask. She exhaled slowly, her breath a visible thread in the cold air. "Not anymore. I was earlier, when they stared, like I was an imposter in their world." Damien's gaze never wavered. "You weren't an imposter. You were the center of it." Elara's eyes searched his for something, doubt, pretense, maybe even fear, but found none. Only a steadiness, a quiet reverence that made her feel less like someone stepping into a world she didn't belong to and more like someone who had built it without knowing. "I didn't change," she said. "Just the dress, the hair, the lighting. But inside, I'm still me. And that's exactly why you stunned them." Damien stepped closer. "They wear masks every day. You only wore yours tonight." Elara looked down at the city below, the rooftops glazed with frost. "You knew what they'd say. You knew they'd laugh." "I did," Damien said with a trace of a smile. "But I also knew they wouldn't be laughing for long." A pause stretched between them, but it wasn't silence. It was saturated with something unspoken, something that pulsed between them since the moment she stepped into his office 2 years ago with a resume in one hand and a broken phone in the other. Back then, he thought he was hiring an assistant. He had no idea he was meeting someone who would challenge him, balance him, and quietly take up residence in every corner of his guarded mind. "You could have chosen anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did." She turned her eyes to him again, and this time they held a question she'd been too careful to ask before. "Why now?" Damien leaned on the marble railing beside her. "Because I was tired of pretending I only saw you as an employee. Tired of letting other people's opinions dictate my truth. Tired of hiding how much I admire you, how much I've needed you, not just professionally." Elara's lips parted, but no words came. Just warmth. A sudden warmth in her chest that made the cold night irrelevant. "You've always stood behind me," he continued. "But you were never behind. You were beside me, every single step. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as just the one who organized my world and started seeing you as the one who made it worth organizing." She blinked, and her eyes glistened, not from tears but from clarity. For all her intelligence, her instinct, her composure, she had somehow missed it. Missed the way his gaze lingered longer than necessary. Missed the softness in his voice when he said her name. Missed the hesitation in his hands when he handed her coffee, like he wanted to say something more. "Elara," Damien said gently, "if tonight was too much, if this changes things and you want to step away, I'll understand. But I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see you. All of you." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked past him, slowly, to the edge of the terrace where the wind curled through her hair. Then, turning, she looked at him not with the eyes of an assistant, but with the steady, open, fearless gaze of a woman who finally understood the space she occupied in his life. "I don't want to step away," she said. "But I also don't want to be a trophy or a statement to your peers." "You never were," he said quickly. "And you never will be." She took a breath. "Then I want to build something real. Not from glances and borrowed moments. I want honesty. Presence. A partnership." "You'll have it," Damien replied without hesitation. She studied him, still in his velvet jacket, still glowing with the aura of power and precision. But now he looked different. Not because he had changed, but because she finally allowed herself to believe he had always been this way with her. She had been too careful, too disciplined, too determined to not blur the lines. But tonight, the lines weren't just blurred, they were gone. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Not choosing someone from your world." "I didn't fall for a world," he said, stepping toward her, his voice low, steady. "I fell for you." Elara felt the heat of his words long after they landed. She had spent years in the shadows of other people's expectations, keeping her head down, doing the work, remaining invisible. But tonight proved something powerful. Visibility wasn't about changing who you were. It was about standing in your truth when the world finally turned its head. From inside the ballroom, a new song began to play, a slow, haunting melody that bled into the night air. Damien extended his hand once more. "Dance with me again." She took it. And this time, under the stars instead of chandeliers, with only the city as their witness, they moved together like they had been waiting for this dance their entire lives. The rest of the world was still watching from inside, murmuring questions, spinning theories, speculating motives. But Elara didn't care. She wasn't the assistant tonight. She wasn't the woman he surprised everyone with. She was the woman who had always been more than enough. And finally, she allowed herself to feel it. She leaned into Damien as the music wrapped around them, their breath mingling in the cold. The city below felt smaller now, less important, because everything she needed was right here, in this moment, in this man, in this daring leap into the unknown. And as the final note echoed into the starlit sky, their world expanded in silence, ready to be rewritten. The night unraveled like a dream no one wanted to wake from. But as the final chords of the orchestra faded, and guests began to trickle from the ballroom like whispers carried by wind, one truth had anchored itself deeper than anything spoken aloud. This wasn't just a fairy tale moment designed to shock the elite. It was a revelation, a storm disguised as grace, a silent power finally stepping into the light. Inside, people no longer whispered about Damien's choice of date with amusement. Now, they did so with awe, with curiosity laced in envy, with the kind of hushed reverence reserved only for those who break the mold and rewrite the narrative. Elara, once invisible, had become unforgettable. Not because of her gown or her beauty, though both were undeniable, but because of her presence. The kind of presence that makes people stop mid-sentence, that commands attention without demanding it. As they stood at the edge of the terrace, the cold air curling through Elara's hair and catching on the shimmer of her gown, Damien took her hand again. Not as a gesture for show, not to complete some perfect photo for the tabloids, but because it felt natural. Because in the silence between them, something had already taken root. Something unshakable. He turned to face her. His tone softened. "I've stood in rooms full of the world's most powerful people. I've been applauded, envied, feared. But tonight, standing next to you, for once I felt seen." Elara's breath caught. Not because of the compliment, but because of the vulnerability wrapped in his words. This wasn't Damien Sinclair, the billionaire, the titan. This was the man behind it all, peeling back the armor he'd worn for years. And he was doing it for her. "I used to think," she whispered, "that love only came when you became someone else. Someone more polished, more daring, someone who fit the frame." Damien stepped closer. "You never needed a frame." She looked up at him, eyes glistening under the stars. "Neither did you." Their connection didn't just linger, it deepened. It grew roots in seconds, fed not by flattery or superficial chemistry, but by shared silence, mutual understanding, and years of watching each other from across rooms where neither dared speak what their hearts already knew. Their love wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or camera flashes. It was in the subtle way they moved in sync, in the pauses they filled for each other, in the safety they found in the presence of one another. From behind the terrace doors, Giselle reappeared, her mask now hanging delicately in one hand. Her expression had changed from smug amusement to something far more conflicted. She had always believed power was about control, appearances, alliances. But now, as she watched Damien and Elara from a distance, she saw something even she couldn't mock: authenticity. And it burned more brilliantly than any diamond she wore. Guests murmured that night not about who wore what or who closed the most deals, but about how Damien Sinclair, the man who never let anyone too close, had looked at his assistant as if she were the only person who had ever mattered. The story spread like a quiet wildfire across social circles, boardrooms, and editorials. Not because of scandal, but because of inspiration. Because someone who had everything had chosen substance over spectacle, heart over status. Weeks passed, but the ripples didn't stop. Headlines called it the masquerade reveal of the year. Photos captured the dance, but not the story behind it. That only a few knew. And they cherished it, because it reminded them that even in a world obsessed with appearances, truth still had a place. And sometimes it wore flats to work. Back at the office, things didn't return to normal. They evolved. Elara no longer blended into the background. She didn't flaunt her relationship, nor did she ask for special treatment. But something in her stride had changed. She walked taller, not because of who she was with, but because of who she'd become. Her presence now inspired interns and seasoned executives alike. And Damien? He didn't care for the noise or the speculation. He just smiled more in meetings, focused harder in strategy sessions, and when Elara entered a room, the steel in his eyes softened, just a little. Their relationship became a quiet revolution. No dramatic announcements. No public displays engineered for social media. Just consistent partnership. Real conversations. Respect. The kind of love that builds empires, not just stories. One afternoon, while they reviewed a pitch deck late into the evening, Damien looked up from his screen and simply said, "I think we should start something new. Not just another company. Something together." Elara raised an eyebrow. "You mean like a project?" "I mean a legacy," he said. "Something with your name beside mine." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to the window, where the city lights stretched out like constellations. "It won't be easy. The good things never are," he replied. She smiled, not because she needed to charm him, but because in her heart she knew. They were no longer two individuals walking parallel paths. They were converging, and they were about to change everything, not because they had something to prove, but because they had something to give. In the end, the masquerade had not revealed a love affair born of spectacle. It had revealed two souls who had seen each other long before anyone else did. It had taken one night for the world to notice. But for Damien and Elara, that recognition had lived quietly for years. In glances exchanged over laptops, in loyalty traded without words, in 1,000 almosts that finally became a yes. And as the seasons changed and new invitations rolled in, and the world continued spinning with its endless appetite for drama, one truth remained, crystal clear and unshakable. Sometimes, the most extraordinary love stories aren't the loudest. They're the ones that start in the silence between the noise. When a man looks at a woman not for who the world sees, but for who she truly is, and chooses her anyway. Every time.